We can start, Tembela.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday session of Reimagine. I am sorry that no one can see my face today because, load shedding things, but I'm one of those never say die type people. So I made sure that I was here for this session today. I want to welcome you all on Facebook and in the Zoom room. I want to remind everybody to please log into the Zoom room. It's time for us to start our weekly discussion as women in the workplace who are grappling with this pandemic. That is what this Reimagine series has been about. It has been about what is this COVID pandemic teaching us about ourselves as women in the workplace. What are the things we need to do to equip ourselves to navigate a lived reality where the workplace is now home, where the classroom is also the office, where housework is calling as much as office work. And we have been walking in this space, journeying with women from all across Southern Africa since the beginning of the lockdown. We're now at a time where entering level 2, there are new demands on us and so many things to consider. What we wanted to do with today's session was talk about what have been the gains and what can we do to ensure that we don't lose these gains. We've talked a lot about what's not working for us, but we haven't focused on what has worked for us and what has been different and better for us, and how do we make sure that that doesn't get lost in the new opening up as we go down in lockdown levels. So for today's session, Tembela is going to be interviewing the amazing Barbara, and they're going to be having a discussion on the issue of the day. What are the gains and how do we make sure that we protect these gains? And we'll be looking at particular actions. So this is an active session. It's not just a listening, questioning session. We're also going to be reflecting on ourselves. What is it that we have done in the workplace? What actions have we taken in the workplace? How have we influenced in the workplace? And sharing ideas on what are some of the things that we can do going forward. That being said, I'm going to hand over to Tembela and we're going to start our discussion. Tembela, you're on mute.
Okay. I was just saying, thank you so much for that great introduction. I think it sets the scene quite well for today's discussion. I must also say thanks to Babs for agreeing to be put on the spot again. I mean, I know we always say this is a safe space, so there are no right, no wrong answers. But it's just so nice to know that we always have sisters within our network that we can always run to. And sisters that we know have got what we need, in this space to empower ourselves. So welcome, Babs, and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I have a bit of a flu. So if I use a lot of my tissue, please be okay with that. I'll try to make sure that I switch off my video. I just actually, Babs, I just want to go back to what Ricky was saying when she started, when she talked about our gains. I mean, from where you are sitting, what would you say have been our gains as women during this time of COVID-19?
Yeah, in fact, before I start, I just want to say thank you again, friends. Now you've become sisters, I should say. Being in the fireplace is always an exciting place to be because it's a safe place, yes, but it's also a place where you feel like you can connect with sisters, you can reflect together, you can cry together, and you can also strategize together. I think coming to today's conversation, and in fact today I'm free thinking. Let me put that disclaimer, because I was given very short notice, but I'm free thinking, but I have a few deliberate things that I thought I could just share with you guys. people have spoken a lot about what are the COVID wins, right? So many people have, in fact, I think there have been more negatives than positives. But looking at the different sessions that we've had and talking to different people, hearing about the different things that have happened to people in different contexts, different spaces, I think there are a couple of things that we can firmly call COVID wins. And I think that the disclaimer here is that it depends on where you are, the context where you are. Because, for example, if I say that in my kind of space where I am, a mother, a working mother for that matter, staying at home with kids, working together with them, sharing chores and things like that has created a bond, a family bond. And we've heard a lot about, you know, one of the COVID wins being that it has created family bonds. There's even a joke that some men have become much closer. It's in inverted commas because they're stuck. There are no bars open, no alcohol. You are forced to begin to recognize the woman or the man that you married. You're forced to recognize the children that you brought on this earth. You're forced to recognize your sisters and brothers and cousins that live in your home. So one of the COVID wins that I really have heard quite a lot is that it has brought a lot of families together, which is a good thing. Obviously, it depends on context, like I've said. In some families, you find that it has created more tension. We've been told that gender-based violence, particularly in Europe and America, has been exacerbated by restrictions of being indoors, by the lockdown restrictions. But by and large, you know, we've heard that one of the COVID wins is family bonding. The second one that I've heard quite a lot and read about is that there's been this push to work from home. We've spoken about it many times and the complexities that this has brought. But to some people, it is a COVID win because it has created flexible working arrangements for some women. So they're able to be with their children, breastfeed if they have to breastfeed because there are no daycare centers that are open, and be able to get on their laptops and work. Sometimes not as easy. Again, it's a caveat, you know, because there are some that have clearly, even amongst ourselves, have said that this has been quite challenging. But by and large, flexible working arrangements have created space for women to begin to reflect on their lives and how they do things and so on. Where I'm sitting myself, I work from home predominantly for the last 5 years. And so when they said stay at home, for me, it didn't make such a difference. But what it created for me was some level of soul searching. As a working woman, I started thinking about my life and saying, you know, what is it that I need to be doing differently beyond COVID? I started attending a lot of the Womanico sessions, and one particular one which really blew my mind was about mindfulness. And I keep telling Tembela that sometimes I sit in the garden and just do nothing, literally do nothing. Watch the flowers, watch the garden, and just do nothing. And you would not believe it, what that has done to me. It has brought a sense of focus. And I always remember the gorilla video. I tell people about it. And now I can see the gorilla passing. I can see the blue curtains, the curtains changing color. You know, I'm actually more mindful. And the more mindful I've become, the more innovative I've also started to become. I'm not bragging, sisters. I'm just saying I have a clarity on a lot of things. Sometimes when I'm sitting in the garden doing nothing, when I get up there, I'm like, oh, wow. So I didn't know that my garden was this big. You know, I didn't actually see that my garden was big, you know. And even when I engage with people, I'm more attentive now. I want to hear, you know, I want to see that gorilla pass, you know. So I'm more attentive. It has made me grow much more. It has brought in some innovation as well. So for example, my son, one day was stuck in the house and he said, oh, I really love gaming. Maybe I should start a YouTube channel. And the idea just popped up and he started a YouTube channel. And I said, oh, okay, yeah, I've got this business where I'm doing cleaning. Why don't I start one here in South Africa? Why not? You know, and ideas kept on just coming and coming and coming. And I think for some people, I'm making it simplistic, but for some people, they've started, for example, cooking more, learning new skills. They have enrolled into online courses, really, empowering themselves because they have a bit of time, but also they have the opportunity that they can be online and be able to innovate and set you. And information keeps coming, and I think it has helped for me to just put aside things that relate to COVID. Sometimes I would not even look at it because sometimes it could be very depressing. So one of the COVID wins, I would say, is that people have become innovative, even in their businesses. They've embraced a new way of doing things. They call it the new normal, although I still don't call it normal. I think it's a challenging space, but I think we're embracing new ways of doing things. I had my son's birthday party virtually, and it was amazing. We connected with more people than we would ideally if we just invited people within Gauteng, So again, these COVID wins, Tembela, might sound superficial, but I think they're a reality for some people. I don't know if you want us to go deeper into the COVID losses, if that will help.
No, Babs, actually, I don't want us to do that. And I was actually thinking, like listening to you narrating and talking about all these wins. And I think at the back of my mind, I'm actually thinking that, we live in a world that is surrounded by so much negativity. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've already done quite a lot of that, which was important for us to name and recognize and acknowledge the challenges that COVID, has brought to us and in our lives. But I also know, and I think listening to you as well, that sometimes when we are like in the midst of that negativity, it's very difficult for us to notice what is working, to notice those flowers and the beautiful garden that we have. And we might not have a big garden or whatever, but we might in fact, I know that a number of times when I go out for walking, sometimes I just find beautiful small flowers by the roadside. Yes. And those are things that are refreshing, that are important for us, that are part of our surrounding. And that whole idea of actually slowing down and begin to pay attention to those little things is so important for us. So it's very nice that you've already, I mean, like what you are saying, that we also need to be mindful that even as we talk about these positives and the wins, there's also another side to it. We need to be cognizant of the fact that we are not homogeneous. Our context in our homes, like it differs from one home to the other. So that in as much as we appreciate the ability to spend time with our families, but we also know that there are people who actually wish their partners would go away so that they can have a bit of freedom and space to themselves, because that's also quite important. And it also, like, again, it depends on the space in which you live and where you're also supposed to do work at the same time. And I think, I mean, listening to you, for me, I'm actually thinking, yes, it is very easy for us to say, but we've been talking about these wins for quite a long time. Yes, let's talk about them. Let's talk about them every day. And because if we don't, they will be lost, in the midst, and we don't realize what we already have. And that's why, for me, like, I think the question that I want to ask you, like as a follow-up, is given that yes, we have so much negativity and a number of these positives and wins that we have already identified, why is it important for us to protect, to guard, and actually find a way of promoting these wins?
Yeah, in fact, I think I'd missed a couple of points, Tembela. I was talking more about my personal COVID wins, much more than broadening to the workplace, which yes. I think would be essential. Maybe just quickly to mention a couple of them. A lot of companies yes. were caught unawares. In fact, countries, presidents, corporations, everybody was caught unawares by COVID-19. And one of the wins that I've seen in some companies, even in our own organization, has been that they've set up these COVID-19 committees. Not in all of them, at least in where I work, and it has helped to sustain the conversation to look at what does our programs look like, for example, what are the implications for funding and so on, and what is it that we need to look at in terms of staff well-being, and including issues of women and others that may be affected, that may have special needs. So that deliberate effort to have a policy and a system change that creates the space for continuous conversation within the organization around COVID and its impact, I think has been a great win. And then for some people, their jobs have changed. So instead of them working, from 8 to 5, because of the flexible working arrangements, they have had to negotiate to work, maybe 2 days in the office and then 3 days at home. So again, that is a COVID win because there is still flexibility, and it's an institutional change that has happened, that has, because of COVID, has created that. There's also been a deliberate effort in some companies I've heard, where even the infrastructure has changed, where they have to come in. Remember, we have to observe WHO and the Department of Health regulations. They had to make changes in the infrastructure. For example, in my organization, we've got our sick bay, our nursing room. There's been some changes that create that safety and all of those things. And I think those are COVID wins because it is a response. And it has helped to start zeroing in much more on what are the needs of the different staff members, particularly those that are coming in the office. If they are pregnant or they're elderly or whatever, they have an option to stay home, but if they need to be in the office, there's been that structural change, an infrastructural change that has happened, which I think is quite great. Obviously, salaries have not been increased. That's not nice. Yeah, but at least there've been those few changes that have been made. And I would imagine that in other organizations, they've even been maybe more drastic. I'd love to hear from other colleagues what other changes have happened within the organizations. Yeah. So coming back to your question, Thembela, if you would allow me, why is it important that we should sustain these conversations? I had jotted a few points here. And in fact, I'd wanted to say that in South Africa, being Women's Month, this month really reminds us of how resilient women are and can be, especially in this country. Historically, you know that women have been challenging, political and societal norms for decades. And even today, we continue to push frontiers to contest, the different stereotypes that remain in the forefront. And these stereotypes could be the struggles that we've been talking about in the workplace for a very long time. But women have remained resilient, And so why is it still important that we should sustain this conversation? Remember, COVID is real and is still alive. It's not like because we've been, we've gone to level 2, then it means that things have become better. And the impact of COVID on women, whether in the workplace or in the home, still remains. We've been told over 3 million jobs have been lost, and predominantly those jobs that have been lost in South Africa have been affecting women, particularly those in the informal sector, those that do not have formal employment. And Thembela, for me, the fact that we have such a huge impact of COVID on women, that's the more reason why we need to stay engaged. If we're not engaged, I can tell you, sisters, if we're not engaged, our struggles will have would have gone 10 steps backwards. We still need to have our voice heard. You might know that 50% of the global population is made up of women, and yet we have very little voice. And so if we do not have voice, colleagues, how will we move the needle to have those changes in the judicial system, in the police system, where there's police brutality against women? How will we move the needle against gender-based violence that is happening in homes because of COVID? How will we, if we keep quiet, colleagues, how will we move the needle on legal and policy reforms that need to happen in this country and many other countries? How will we move the needle to have budget allocation to things that matter, women issues and children and poverty and other things? So it's important, Tembela, that we really remain engaged. The voice of women, or the participation of women in shaping discourse around whether COVID-related issues or post-COVID related issues remains critical, because we are a critical player. Unless we don't see ourselves as a valuable player in society or in changing discourse, then we should sit back and say, oh, it is a government thing or it's a private sector thing. But where I'm sitting, because I know that things should not be done. There's an old adage that we always say that, right? That nothing about us without us. So why should we give up now? You know, why should we let others lead the way when we can voice out, when we can be at the table and lend our voice there? Our voice is as critical as the voice of men and other people in society. So I still think that we need to remain at the table. We need to also make sure that the issues that affect us in the workplace or in the society remains on the political agenda. And who is to best put them there? It's us women. We cannot blame the politicians all the time. I think we need to step up. We need to be true to ourselves as women and say, what can I do? And I think we'll get into detail in terms of what exactly can we do about those issues, yeah. But we need to remain engaged. Our voice really counts and matters, yeah.
I'm actually glad, Babs, that you went back to also surface and be more clearer about the issues that are at work as well. Because, listening to you and motivating why we should be engaged, of course, we know that we feel the pain at home, in society, in our churches. We also feel the pinch in the workplace as well. And just listening to you, just allow me to be rude and use a rude language. So you say, all those points, I've written a number of the points that you've mentioned. They were the ones who are already losing out, if you think about the levels of unemployment, we make the majority of the people, at work. And if you think about the numbers of people that are losing out most, it is us. So the rude language I want to use is we're the ones who are mostly screwed, and that's the reality. And sometimes we must just name things for what they are, so we can really understand what is at stake here. So we may decide we are not going to do anything, we're just going to complain about it. We may feel that we don't really have much power and all that, but at the end of the day, we need to understand as well that there are big structural issues that remain. And I think that's what you are actually saying to us, and that if we cannot rely on other people, to actually make things right for us. We actually have to be the ones who step up and do something about these issues. You saying we need to make sure that we remain at the table. I saw somebody was actually had written that. I think it was somebody who has written a post by herself. She says she creates her own table.
Yes, and I saw that too. Yes.
So I actually thought that's actually quite a nice one. That actually,
if there's no table,
if there's no table, because let's create our own. You see. So I actually like that. I don't know whether just to give you a little bit of a break, perhaps, before we move on to the next questions. I don't know whether there's anybody in the group who wants to add maybe one word or two on why we should care about like continuing with these conversations and protecting the gains that we have made. I don't know whether there's anybody
maybe
there,
before somebody comes in, Tembela, I think this is an important point, that women are the primary caregivers, and across the board. We can argue and say men do play a critical role. If you look at even in the COVID response at the front line, we have more women right at the front line than men. But also women, so in African society particularly, play a very key caregiving role. So we're at the front line of receiving services, looking after children, looking after old parents, and many other people that are in our care. And so if we're not engaged, there is no way that we can serve those people in the right way. We'll not be able to know what services have changed, what protocols have changed, where can we access funding and all of those things. And so it becomes very important because we play such an important role in society. I don't want to trivialize the role and make it very, create a construct that we are supposed to be in the kitchen or caring for others. But the reality is that, we have that critical role that we play as caregivers. So I think it becomes important for us to be engaged and sustain the conversation so we could serve those that we love and those that are in our care.
No, but that's the reality, perhaps, and the truth is that if we are to change that again, it calls upon us to actually talk about them around these things, but also look for solutions. I mean, if you think about it, I can remember one of the first conversations that we've had. I don't remember who it was. It must have been a participant from Uganda, I think, and she was talking about the fact that it's so hard to juggle all these responsibilities, between home and work. So and it is that is still our current reality, and therefore, if we are to change that, or if that is to change, it is us who actually have to find ways of negotiating the changes, and where it's possible to make firm demands, we actually do that. So that's actually important for you to remind us of that. So friends, I don't know if you have any point you want to add on what Babs have said. Perhaps there is an important win that you notice that you think we must not lose sight of. Otherwise, I will continue. Okay, I see that there are no takers. Let's continue. Let's continue, perhaps, on that line of questioning, and I think as we talk about how to influence the change, I think the question for me is, even before you can come to talk about how should we influence in our current context, perhaps something that might also help us is to think about generally what are the different ways of influencing that you have seen making a meaningful impact, not just around what we are talking, not just around COVID. In your I'm asking about your own experience, not necessarily in relation to COVID.
Okay, I actually was almost talking about the South African context, where influencing has influencing has almost been synonymous with toying, that we have to toy and break things, burn tires and burn libraries and all of those things, and go to the streets and so on. There is a place for that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. Of course, don't burn the libraries, because then your children won't have the space to read. But there is power, Tembela, in mobilizing a critical mass around an issue. And I think we spoke about this with a few other speakers when they were talking about how do you mobilize power in the workplace and so on. I think having a critical mass becomes very important. Sometimes we may think that we may not be able to mobilize. And you may think, oh, well, where do I even start from? I may just send this post and say, guys, we're meeting in this place, and then nobody comes. You have those fears. There are many ways that you can begin to influence. And if you remember last time when I spoke about the different forms of power that we have, if you recognize the power that you're sitting with, you can then begin to exercise that power. It could be your managerial power, it could be your knowledge power, your information power, your connection power. All of those can still, be utilized in mobilizing and getting collaborators and others such that we sustain the conversation. But on a bigger scale, when it comes to issues of COVID and others that affect women, I think influencing structure, systems, policies becomes quite critical. And how do we do that? One of the things that I've learned is that we as women, when we are telling our stories, we go in defense mode. We lament a lot. We don't have a lot of evidence. And so when you want to engage with policymakers around issues, I think it's important that we begin to gather evidence. And there's quite a lot of evidence. And the evidence that I want to dwell on today is evidence that showing that things are working. Remember, we're talking about the COVID wins. How about us amplifying those COVID wins, creating evidence around them and saying, these are things that are working, and these are things that are working for women. Donors, I can tell you, there are few donors at the moment that are funding activities or initiatives that are talking about the impact of COVID. There are few, but not as many. A lot of them are looking at what strategies are working. What is the emerging evidence that is showing that these things are working? So friends, in our different portfolios, I talked about creating a critical mass and mobilizing, but generating evidence around best practices becomes quite critical. And I'll put a caveat again on this. You can have analysis and you get into paralysis and all of those things. They say evidence talks to the intellectual or to the mind. But if we couple evidence with stories of success, how...
I can't hear you. You are breaking. I don't know whether it's on my side, but it looks like you're breaking.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I have not moved. I have not changed anything.
Okay,
can you hear me?
Again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't move.
Yes.
I didn't do anything. It could just be an internet glitch. So, Tembela, I was saying that evidence, as much as we would like to talk about evidence and that it's critical for our influencing capabilities, it needs to be coupled with stories. Evidence talks to the intellectual stats and all of those things, but when you couple it with stories and stories that are working, it talks to the heart. Even the hardest politician will be moved by a story of a mother who has found maybe a traditional way of dealing with COVID and has saved lives. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be scientific. It doesn't need to be statistical. It's just a win story, the COVID win stories that we're talking about, coupled with evidence. I think that would move a lot of things. And that's where innovation comes in. And this is where you start now having programs and projects being scaled up. The other thing that I've seen, Tembela, that we can do to sustain the conversation is, I know people are so busy, and some people have already gone back to their new normal, and so they may not have enough time. But I think we need to, again, sustain the conversation through campaigns and media engagements. You won't believe it. I do this all the time. I would wake up in the morning. I look at what tweeting doesn't cost much. You would say, you need data and all of that. Signing a petition where women are saying, we need a change in this. We don't want any more women being killed by men. We don't want, things that are not respecting the dignity and the rights and protection of women. It doesn't take us long. You will not believe it. One tweet can go viral and just change how things are done. Just the other day, I was looking at this story of a young boy in America that he's a little, I don't know, maybe some of you have seen it. He's a little boy, I think he's 7 years old. He was trying to save his brother. He was trying to save his sister, little sister, from a dog. Dog was trying to bite the sister. And he had made this Captain America shield and whatever. And he used it to save the sister. That video was tweeted. It went viral. This boy, you can check it out on the internet. The guy who created Captain America movies and so on now has sponsored this child. They have propped this child. They've given him the Captain America suit. He's all over the place. And the message there, Tembela, is basically that, you know what, you need to save the next person. However young you are, look at this young role model that tried to save his young sister. So basically what I'm saying is that our stories coupled with evidence can be so powerful that can really move that needle that we've been trying to change over the years. And so I would encourage you guys, if there are any petitions, sign up on those petitions. If there's a tweet that you can do, tweet as constantly as possible. Because what is important is for us to build a critical mass. Critical mass catalyzes change. A critical mass is what moves. The more people talk about how women are being exploited in the workplace because of COVID and the bad working conditions, of women because of COVID, the more you talk about it with evidence, the more you tell your story about, the more you tweet about it, it becomes very important. And people start asking, who are these people keep talking about Womaniko? What is the hell is this Womaniko thing, what is the fireplace? They start asking questions. And what we want to remember earlier, I talked about us being critical players in shaping the discourse. The moment we begin to do those kind of things, we are shaping the minds and hearts of people and changing discourse in the direction that we want. We don't need the money, we don't need the connection. Sometimes it's just that one tweet that will change everything, So really, let's make our voices count. I don't know if you need me to go into detail or there are other things that you wanted to ask.
No, well, I'll come back there. I actually have a follow-up question on what you are saying. Yeah. But before I come in, I see Nandi has written there saying, we hear you, Barbara, the young ballet dancer from Nigeria who just got a scholarship to one of the top dance schools in New York. Wow. And so anyway, I think it is building on what Nandi is saying, is building on what you are saying, that sometimes it is the little actions that we might not think much about a tweet. I mean, honestly speaking, it is so true that in the mornings when we wake up, it's actually, sometimes you actually feel guilty because you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've not even prayed.
Yes, it's true.
Here I am looking at my social media, but it is actually those kind of things that actually, using your words, that shift the needle. Yeah, and I like what you're saying in terms of the stories and the fact that actually stories, they move our hearts, they connect our hearts, because it is also through our stories that we are also able to connect through our values as well. And but the question I have there, Babs, is on the evidence. So when you say we also need to provide evidence, what kind of things might we be talking about here or looking at?
Yeah, so let me just give you a practical example. In our Asia office in World Vision, we did a research that was looking at the impact of COVID on women in the community. And it came out to be that a lot of women who were working stopped work, so their livelihoods was impacted. And there were stories around how the power dynamics changed in the homes and how they were not able to sustain the families, and other issues started creeping in, like, malnutrition and hunger, and all of those issues started creeping in. And as I'm talking now, because of the evidence, the stories were there, but there was evidence of the scope of the research that we had done on the impact. This is sitting with some of the donors. Some of the donors have come through to support us, to help those women with some of the economic empowerment programs. They've supported World Vision to make sure that they create spaces for those women to tell their stories even more to others in terms of how they're responding to that situation. So it is from that evidence that even if it's got some stories in there that has created opportunities for further funding and creating the voice for women in Asia to speak about the impact that COVID has had on them. Yeah. So we could do it even as Womaniko. It could be about the impact of COVID in the workplace. What is the evidence that is emerging? Because universities are interested, you know, and coupled with stories. Obviously, Womaniko will love to tell stories. They are powerful stories. Let's add a bit of evidence to that and begin to push the needle as well in that area.
Yeah, I like that idea. Already we are moving us towards thinking about, in this context, what are the kind of things that we can actually work with.
Yes, yes.
I mean, already even the examples you've given, but I mean, it's really things that are not only confined to what has happened in the past.
Yes.
Those are things that we can actually use in our current context.
Yes.
But also I like what you're saying in terms of the universities, because honestly speaking, if you think about it, from March, when we started with these conversations, we've collected so much information that could actually form part of research.
Exactly, yes.
And it is that whole thing of saying, so how do we make use and take advantage of the information that we've gathered through this process, but also thinking beyond ourselves into saying, who else might we be looking at? I see that your son wants to talk to you, Babs. So please go ahead.
He's actually gone.
Yeah, so I do think that it might actually be very nice for us to be thinking about who in the academic field, for instance, might we need to work with. I mean, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking that there are people that I used to work with in the ecumenical sector before. And you know, we can actually tap into.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and then I also wanted to say, in relation to research and evidence building, the need for us to begin to create interlinkages with the issues, because sooner or later, COVID is going to be a tired conversation. Even if it's still going to be there, to be a tired conversation. So how can we be strategic as women to begin to elevate the conversation? So it's about sustaining the conversation. Remember, it's still real and it's still there. And it's still creating a lot of impact, not only on economies, but also on women, both in the workplace and at home. So how can we begin to create interlinkages? I was thinking about what happened with the discussion around HIV and AIDS, for example. You saw how the campaign was moving. The campaign was about awareness raising and so on, and people now knew about it and knew what they needed to do. They began to then look at, you know, people are now aware, what do we need to do? Okay, prevention, how do we create preventive measures and things like that? It's the same with COVID. How many times have you heard about washing hands? Sanitizing, washing hands, coughing in the armpit, and you get tired of those messages. So how do we then begin to look at issues for evidence building that create linkages? For example, can we start looking at what has been the long-term or is mental state of women who have been affected by COVID? So it's COVID and mental state, you know, COVID and, pay parity in the workplace. It is about COVID and police brutality, whatever. The point I'm making here is that we cannot continue saying just wash your hands. We have heard that message and we know how, in fact, even before the message came, we knew that we needed to wash our hands. Maybe we're not doing it right, but we cannot hammer that point more than enough. Let's try to start creating interlinkages. It's the same that happened with issues of debt and development. I used to work in an organization where we're championing developed countries to cancel debts of less developed countries. You can go as far as you want, but then the conversation started shifting. Is it okay for us to just be asking for debt cancellation? Maybe what we need to be doing is to begin to talk about how can we enhance domestic resource mobilization, for example? How can we enhance trade relations between Africans and others? So we begin to lift the conversation. It's not just about pushing for one straight angle, but creating those interlinkages. So I think within Womaniko, we can begin to draw those interlinkages that will help us to remain engaged and sustain the conversation. Yeah.
That's actually very, very nice. I mean, I'm just picking up very clear messages. Perhaps who else should we be working with? What are the interlinkages that we need to make? How do we make this an agenda of other people and not just our small agenda? It's actually so beautiful and very clear and quite a helpful discussion. And I think I'm gonna give over this conversation to Ulrike to see how she brings in other people into it. And perhaps if you've got any other points that you want to make, perhaps you could make them or you could make them at the end.
Okay. I think we can go ahead with Ricky.
Okay. Thanks, Babs. That was really, really thoughtful. You can tell
I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm enjoying the conversation as well. I'm enjoying the conversation. Yes.
I'm really glad. Quite a relaxed conversation, and yet so rich at the same time, really giving us practical things that we can do, but also making it less threatening. And also helping us to think that actually we can influence in a way that is really not going to make us feel like we can't do this.
Exactly. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. That's actually quite helpful.
And reminding people not to leave those WhatsApp groups that they've created. Let's remain in those groups, colleagues, because it's there that we begin to build things. It doesn't hurt. You can mute for 1 year, but keep listening, keep hearing what's happening. Please don't leave those WhatsApp groups.
I don't know who's on Galaxy. Perhaps you could write for me your name privately. And she's saying perhaps we must also write in newspapers where you will know, people will read each of the stuff.
Of course.
So perhaps you could just tell me who you are coming up with that nice suggestion. So I like that idea of the WhatsApp group, but also I want to stretch it into saying, let's engage those groups as well. I mean, those, in as much as this space is a safe space, those WhatsApp groups are also very safe.
Of course.
Oh, that's Sandy has joined. Thank you so much, Sandy, for joining us. That's another academic person there.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm sure they have a lot of topics lined up that they can help us to build that evidence with the stories that we are creating.
Yes, great. Ricky, let me hand over to you and help us into the next part of the conversation. Thanks, Babs.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Thembela and Barbara. And what an amazing, fiery conversation. Really helping us to understand why this matters, and helping us to understand the ways that we can take it from understanding why it matters to actually being able to do something about it. So much richness raised in the discussion, from all the different wins, the COVID wins, down to the reasons why we have to remain engaged and the ways we can remain engaged. I want to open the discussion up to the floor at this stage. And I want to start the discussion amongst the participants. And for those of us who are joining us on Facebook, please feel free to write comments on the Facebook page. But we always seem to get stuck at this point. And I think what we've picked up in a lot of our session is part of the stuckness is fatigue. right? A sense that as women, we are doing so much and around, we still have to do levels. So what I'd like to hear from the participants are, what are the small things that you have done to influence change in whatever context? Because I think talk about the small things, whether it is a petition or it is a tweet campaign or social media campaign, but what did change come out of? I'm opening the floor up for hands. I didn't catch Galaxy 8's name. Did you say it was Santi?
Yes.
I see that you're unmuted. So I'm going to hand over the floor to you. I'd really like us to talk about what are the things that we can do from where we are.
Hi, my signal is not that good, but I do want to be part of the conversation. One of the things that we've been doing with our students is just to raise awareness, and just reflecting on Mampa was saying, it's really small things that we do. The small projects that do, for example, when they are in the community, they will maybe issue out masks, but then they will also just educate the individuals on the importance of protecting themselves. And one project that they did that I thought, actually, this is small but so big. Our third-year students came back to university this week on Monday.
Oh no, did we lose Santi? Hey, and we lost her.
Yes, she might come back.
Yeah, I hope that she's able to dial back in, because I'm really keen to know how people are taking action from the different corners. She is dialing back in, so I'll give her the floor. But while we're waiting for her to reconnect, one of the things I wanted to say is I have a lot of friends who work in the corporate space, corporate professional space. And one of the things that they do is they have clubs where they raise resources in order to support the people who do spend the time doing the kind of evidence gathering, doing the community level work, doing the social justice work, doing the advocacy work. So I think that one of the big things that we often overlook is that we don't have to be doing the work ourselves, but we can provide the kinds of resources and support and skills and experience and networks that allow the people who are doing that work to be able to amplify their work. So for example, a big part of the Womaniko space and how we navigate in the Womaniko space is we open up our what's the modern word for facts, our contacts. That's the modern word. We open up our contacts so that we can navigate and reach women in all levels of leadership in all types of organization, and just being able to pass the message that way and sharing those kinds of resources, it amplifies the messages that we're trying to ensure that policy and budget allocations are provided for. And in the end, we're able to see solutions that impact on everyone. So for me, I think that's a very valuable lesson that we can learn, just in terms of keeping that WhatsApp group. That WhatsApp group can be a resource space. That WhatsApp group can be, guys, the 10 of us are signing a petition, or guys, the 10 of us are contributing 100 Rand a month. And with that 1,000 Rand a month, that could be feeding, that could provide food in a crèche, which helps working women, even if it's not in your own context, it helps working women in another context because development and early childcare support. So I think we can definitely begin to think out of the box about some of the things that we can do to escalate and build on the gains that we've had in this pandemic, and also what we've learned that we need from this pandemic. I see Sonti's back. Sonti, you fell off the call before you were finished. Would you like to finish what you were sharing with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so what I was saying is it's really the small things that we do that really matter. It's not always the big things or where we actually have big funding. And that's what I learned from just observing what our students were doing in the communities. And secondly, I was just thinking, in terms of research, it's a good idea. I just want to add that it's also good to target where people are. You know, media that where people can actually easily access the information. For example, if we write something to newspapers like The Conversation or Daily Sun, that's where everybody is. People buy the Daily Sun. So if we want to give people information, we can actually just package it in a very easy, consumable way. Simple English, but we still portray the information that people need in the community. Because not everybody reads articles, to be honest. Yeah, thank you. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much for the information, Barbara. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sonti. Are there any other hands? Tembela, do we have any comments on the Facebook page from the live feed?
No, we don't have on Facebook. We just had likes and hearts, that's all.
And for those of us in the room, Michelle, Nandi, Cindy, Swa, can you share with us what are some of the actions that you have taken that have gone on to effect change around women in the workplace? So we don't have any takers in the room. I want us, we have shared so many rich things today in conversation, Barbara. And we've also had extensive conversation. What are the difficulties of and the challenges that hold us back? So I want us to move the conversation on. Can you guys still hear me? Tembela?
Yes, we can hear you, Ricky.
Okay. I want us to move the discussion on a little bit. I was hoping to hear examples. So when I ask the question, what small action have you taken? It's because I want us to be able to recognize and see that the small actions come together to make big action. And it moves us to a space where we can talk about solidarity, right? And different ways of showing solidarity. How when we move and act collectively, it has a far greater impact than when we move and act on our own. And so I wanted us to talk a little bit about what other ways that we can show solidarity. And I know that that's an unusual word in a workplace context, right? But in a workplace context, in these COVID and pandemic times, when we have really come to see what are the inequalities, and we have come to see what are the inequities that affect us, right? So even being on a call like this, there are entire communities where that's a huge challenge for them. I started off talking about load shedding is showing me flames today. But in fact, in all the interactions that I've been, entire communities that face that reality every day, because it's either load shed, right? And so the virtual space becomes a space that is not. So I think that when we're talking about affecting the way that we engage and reach beyond the virtual spaces that we have set up. And so one of the things that Barbara was beginning to raise is who do we work with and how do we work with them? I think in building a campaign, Tembela, we really need to think about how do we reach out to communities that haven't been able to be part of our conversations, and how do we share this journey and the discussions in those kinds of spaces. With that, I'm going to ask one last time if you want to share about how do we maintain the gains that we have talked about today.
Perhaps people are tired. I'm not sure, but I also don't have an answer, Rigi, beyond what was already shared. I think the bigger issue for me is how do we take some of the suggestions that have been made by UBAPS today and really inspire people to do the little they can, because I think for me the important thing is to see what is actually practical. I'm actually wondering as well, just to perhaps we could actually think a little bit about, for instance, the small survey that we have shared. And we have seen very few responses. I mean, I think we've got about 37 responses. That's good, but also I know that we could actually do more. And I think we can rephrase that question, Ricky, and just make a practical example. So when you see that request to complete this small survey, so what normally comes into our mind, so that we can also get to understand what stops people from acting on those little things. Is it the fear? Is there something else perhaps that we don't understand? Because like signing a petition, for instance, is a very simple thing because information is already shared with you. All you need to do is you put your name. So on these different ways that we are normally used in our days, to influence, I think it would be interesting to also know, to get feedback from people as to have you participated? Have you not? If you haven't, what's the concern for you that stops you perhaps from signing in or from answering a survey? But I see that Nandi has had a hand up again. I was just answering.
Thanks, Ching. What is understanding what are the barriers to our action. And, often it can be fears, it can be fatigue, so much of the issues that you've named. And we do have to do the work of finding the inspiration and the courage to step into the work that we know has to continue. Nandi, you had your hand up.
Okay, so I think a couple of things. I think it's also just context, right? So one of the things in the work that I'm doing is a lot of women have lost their jobs. So people are trying to use the overused word of these corona times. People are trying to pivot, right? So I don't know whose mic is on. And if you could, okay. So in the pivoting with one group of women that I work with, a woman who used to be a domestic worker has now started being a farmer, for lack of a better word. Really started with a group of women, starting community gardens in their community because they weren't working in the level 5 and level 4 of the lockdown. And then they realized that actually they were making more money, through the community garden that they had started by reselling their seedlings. And while that's not in the workplace, and until they started farming, just using initially their own backyards, they had to worry about transportation, all these other costs, which were what their former employment took up. So it's like, so I think it's really beginning to understand the different realities of women and the majority of women in South Africa. That for some women it's really hard to come onto the call, like Ricky was saying, because of load shedding, which in particular communities, so in a lot of townships, there's constant load shedding. Load shedding may look like 12 or even 18 hours in one day. And so that makes it very, very difficult to connect to a conversation like this. But also, I think even when you're a professional, but you're a consultant, and you're not working the regular 9 to 5, the way some of the surveys that I've interacted with for Womaneco are structured, they're not structured in a way that makes sense to my reality. So I'll start a survey and then I'm like, actually, I can't, that question doesn't make sense to me, or that one, or, so then it's just like, okay, maybe, it's not for me, it's for a particular kind of, professional. So I think those are some barriers, at least to the surveys that I've interacted with. And yeah, so I think it's also the notion of being a single parent, where you have so many, conflicting responsibilities on time. And, for some parents, you're home educating and you're a parent, and, you're the only person who's bringing income into the home. And, so it's just like, okay, so what value is, it's really aligning to what value is a 90-minute session with other women going to provide for me. And it's not always readily obvious. And I think it's a lot of spaces for women, sometimes just because women are grappling and struggling with so many various different things, it's hard to kind of say, this is what is, this is what the 90 minutes on a Womaneco fireside conversation can give or can be for me. Like, it's a form of self-care. But when you have so many competing responsibilities, it just feels like something extra. And because we're not in the same room, I think there's also with all of our gains, where you're not driving and you're not worried about getting home and attending to your children, there's still also a loss in the intimacy of space, physical space, which sometimes makes it more difficult to engage in events or processes when they are on online platforms. That's me done. If you heard any of that, since my phone's acting up.
I think it helps us to think about how we're moving forward, how we are building solidarities across the differences, and taking into account the very different situations and contexts that we were working with. I remember Barbara saying at the beginning, it is very contextual. And how are we hearing stories from all the different contexts? I know that Sindiswa wanted to speak. Sindiswa, do you still have a comment to make?
No, dear. I'm just here to absorb and listen.
Thank you, Sindiswa. And then I think we're going to have our last comment from Sonti. We are at 6:15, so we're going to be winding down the session after Sonti has shared with us.
Something that Barbara said, which really, I think, for me, it will be my take-home message, is sometimes we don't even think we can make a difference. And it just made me think that actually, if I start thinking that I can make a difference, that small difference will make a huge difference. And if I start believing that and really acting on that on a daily basis, that actually, I can influence the situation. I can influence the situation. I'm going to do something about it. That will actually take me far and make a difference even in my society or at work or in my community. And thanks for that, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. You know, we've had an amazing discussion today of really understanding why this kind of space matters, what this kind of space can catalyze, why women's issues and the impacts on women and the issues that affect women are important, and why we must stay keyed in to that agenda. I really love Barbara's phrase, how we have to continue. So even a small shift heading backwards. So we have to make sure that we also protect the gains, however small that they may be, that we have made in the period of this pandemic. Before we close for today, I want to ask Barbara if you have any last comments after our discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much again for this opportunity, and thank you, Galaxy 8 and Nandi. Your reflections are amazing. I've learned quite a lot from you as well. I just wanted to say, sisters, that we have more to lose than to gain if we don't get engaged. We have more to lose than to gain if we don't get engaged. And I think we as women, as much part of the solution as we are as part of the problem. We shouldn't forget that. So if we don't engage, we are part of the problem, but we are as much part of the solution as we are part of the problem. So I think we need to be intentional. We need to take those baby steps and build that critical mass that is required to move the needle. Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. In preparing to close our session, so I'm going to give Tembela to say our thank yous and goodbyes. But in preparing to close our session, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the survey that Tembela mentioned, and about the campaign that we are doing the work to launch. And as Barbara just said now, what we have come to is the realization that it is better to continue to walk the walk and to go step by step than to be discouraged by the delays. So in terms of the survey, we will continue to ask people to continue to contribute, because that is how we generate evidence. And in terms of the campaign, we're still asking our participants in this group, our viewers on Facebook, all the women in our networks, all the employees and employers in our networks, to really contribute the stories that can help us to begin to carve out what are the issues both that need to be addressed and what are the best ways that we can address them. So when we use the hashtag #DareToSeeUs, we're saying these issues matter and we're not ready to give up on them. And we're asking workplaces to reflect on how they have done so in the lockdown period and how they plan to continue to do so. Because this pandemic, as Barbara said, is far from over. And the impacts on women are not going to end now, even as we go down in lockdown levels. So we continue to do the work. We continue to seek support from companies. We continue to seek support from business leaders. And when we have reached a critical mass, we will definitely launch this campaign. But until that time, we ask you to think about those stories, to share the stories with us, to do your videos telling us the stories, to pass the hashtag on and the campaign documents on and the survey on to your colleagues, to your networks, on your WhatsApp groups, and help us build a critical mass on these issues that we have to make sure we keep engaging on. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is where to next week. So one of the things that we have noticed is that as we've gone down in lockdown levels, there's been increased pressure on women in the workplace. So things keep changing quickly. At different lockdown levels, there are different rules of engagement. And these seem to have increased the pressure instead of reduced the pressure. So we really want to plan a check-in session, a how are we doing session. We've seen more and more people unable to attend the space, unable to juggle the multiple demands, as Nandi was saying. And so we'd like to have some feedback as to when is a good time to schedule the session so that we can have all the people who we've journeyed with, and we can really discuss context now and make sure that we're talking about the self-care that is necessary now. Because one thing that's very clear for us at Womaniko, and that became one of the big wins for us in this COVID period, is that understanding that it's important to take care of ourselves. And we want to create a space that recognizes that it is not yet nirvana. It is not yet uhuru, and there's still many, many pressures that women are facing on a daily basis, straddling the home and the workplace and their particular community context. So that being the case, that's where we want to move to next week. But we will be doing consultations with all our participants to make sure that we find a time that people can key in. So we may indeed move the time of the session next week as a result of this. But we want you to please keep it on your calendar and join us again next week for the Reimagine session, this space where women get together to talk about the matters, the issues that matter to them. With that, I'm handing over to Tembela to wish us goodbye and send us off for the evening.
Well, Thank you so much, Ricky. You can also unmute. You can also show your face if you've got the courage. But just to say thank you so much to Babs, to Michelle, to Nandi, to Cindy, to Sonji, to Ricky for such a beautiful conversation. You know, the truth is that we don't need to be many people to have great conversations. And I think tonight's conversation is just an example of that. I just want to close off and reiterate what I had. Believing that we can make a difference. We really need to believe that we can make a difference. It doesn't matter how little action we take, because when those actions come together, they make what we are doing stronger they make us stronger as women. And we just need to believe that with our stories, we can actually change the world. You know, sometimes when you talk about stories, it's like, it's just a story. But the truth is, it is these kinds of stories that we share in this platform that change the world. I think we've heard that from UPAPS today. So I just want to encourage you to share your stories with us, whether it is through an image, and write any little positive thing that you have seen, you know, in your workplace in terms of how they've responded to COVID. Share that story with us. It can actually inspire a lot of change out in the world. Yeah, the last thing that I actually think is quite important, I think what Nandi was saying, is that the spaces are closing down. COVID had given us a great opportunity to open up spaces and to actually show us that even if we don't meet face to face, but we can still connect. Let's not lose that. I know that there are so many things around us and we need to be mindful of that reality, that spaces are closing down and that for other people it's very difficult even to make this 90 minutes. But let's try our best and do what we can. With those few words, thank you so much and good night. Hope you will have good suppers.
Thank you very, very much, everyone, and God bless you until we meet again.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Michelle.